Need psychotherapy online or in person? Check out tinyurl.com/THT Psychotherapy. The George Brassey Podcast is made possible with funding provided from Brassey Global Strategies, LLC, a leading political consulting, public policy, government affairs, and research firm. Are you interested in running for elected office? Need advice? Call or email George, 708-769-5015. Brassey Global Strategies 1@gmail.com.
Before we get to the interview, I just want to tell you about our newest sponsor, Union Signs and Printing. Union Signs and Printing is a union sign shop located near Chicago, Illinois, that specializes in the production of corrugated plastic lawn signs used in applications ranging from political and election usages to unions, schools, and businesses. They also produce a vast array of other products, including American-made, union-printed t-shirts, banners, bio cards, literature, door hangers, business cards, and trifold. Get a hold of Union Signs and Printing at 815-740-1688 or find them on the internet at unionsignsandprinting.com. And don't forget to tell them you heard about their services on the George Brassey Podcast. Hey everyone, it's George. I'm so glad to welcome Mark Peysakhovich to the podcast. Mark, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Mark, tell the audience a little bit about who you are and how did you become a lobbyist and consultant?
Well, I first of all, I came here as an immigrant from another country when I was 10 years old, actually as a refugee. And that informed my interest in politics, actually, because, you know, one of the first things I learned as I was, you know, initially growing up in Russia was how to lie, how to say, no, I'm not Jewish, or, you know, no, my parents don't have money, or, you know, whatever it is, I sort of had to very early on become a chameleon in a communist world. And one of the things I learned is that you can't say what you think about politicians. That could get you in real trouble. So when I came here and saw the rough and tumble democracy, it gave me an initial interest in politics. And actually, you know, I was sort of always one of those kids who was interested in watching the news or reading the newspapers, although we could never afford newspapers early after we came here. But, you know, I was at the library a lot. And I went to college where I was on a political science track. And an advisor in college introduced me to an unknown woman at that point whose name was Jan Schakowsky. And I participated as an internship for college. I participated in her first successful campaign for state representative. And so that put me on a very long track of sort of public affairs, government relations, communications, track of jobs. I had, you know, pleasure of doing really a lot of things. Started my career as running an organization that helped people with disability benefits, then went to a labor union, then went to a sort of the Jewish version of the NAACP, a Jewish, you know, public interest, public affairs group, and then ultimately spent close to 20 years, I think 18 or 19 years, as head of government relations for the American Heart Association and American Stroke Association in Illinois. And so, you know, in 2016, 2017, I finally was grown up enough to go out on my own and met some people, got some clients, and here I am working on interesting issues as a lobbyist. And, definitely like not an A-list celebrity kind of a lobbyist, but, I have more success than I deserve, so I will not complain.
Mark, that transition from growing up in Russia till you're 10 years old to coming to the United States, what does that do to a 10-year-old's mind?
Well, you know what? Let me just give you an example. One of the things um, that I experienced that I will never forget was walking into a Dominic's grocery store for the first time. And even though by that time, because when you leave Russia as a Jewish refugee, which we did in 1980, you go to Austria where you spend a few weeks while your paperwork catches up with you. Then you go to Italy for several months, and then you come to America. I will never forget the first time I walked into Dominic's. My jaw just dropped, and it was like being in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory for somebody else. So it's something that I will never forget, and I really understand what it's like to be here. And I had strange experiences, everything from the horrible to the wonderful. We left because I got beaten up in first grade in my school by other first graders for being a kike. And after that we left, we came here. I went to a very ritzy Jewish day school on a full scholarship. And there, the well-off Jewish kids weren't particularly enamored with me for being a Russian or being different, just like the Russian kids in Moscow weren't enamored with me for being a Jew. So you learn how to adapt, and you learn how to articulate things and express yourself. And you sort of have the good and the bad. And, uh, the other thing it did is put me on equal footing at 12 years old with my parents, because I had to help them understand things. So I don't know, unless you want to make this a psychiatry session, I'll stop there.
Mark, when you think of how there's been in recent years more interest in far left ideas like socialism or communism, given the fact that you grew up in the last decade of the Soviet Union, does that raise any suspicion for you?
Certainly it does, but I'll tell you why it does. It's not even which particular ism it is. It's just that it is an ism. And I find that isms don't comport neatly into people's minds. And you gave me homework to talk about books, and I know we'll do that later, but, one of the books I remember is, something about the Holocaust, which sort of gave me an option or a view into the sort of the banality of evil, how people can be, loving husbands and fathers and be, going to work every day, murdering thousands of people. So I just think that most of the systems that we put up are not absolute systems. And I don't think we have any right to expect that any of them will be any better than the people who are in charge of them. And that's really all of us. So on the one hand, yes, you want to control your own destiny in America. On the other hand, if a disaster hits, you want federal government money. If, you lose your job, you want money. If you become disabled, you want money. If you are a farmer who does poorly on a crop, you want money from the federal government. And even people like Darren Bailey looks like have gotten lots of handouts from the federal government. And who would have thunk that he was a communist? So I think it's just, the isms don't really work well. And I'm much more of a believer, actually, and I'm not really religious, but the golden rule really seems like I really do believe, and I didn't, it's not on my list of books, but I think, everything you needed to know, you learned in kindergarten, from, wash your hands to be nice to people to don't hit anyone, are all things that we tend to forget. Now let me give you a perfect example. Everybody talks about the free market and how the free market is wonderful, and why is that? It's because it's based on this notion that when people make the choices, that is the most efficient way to come to a rational place. And so what this model depends on is rational decision making, the ROI, the pluses and minuses of choosing a product, making a decision, and that's how society overall balances, is each individual making a rational decision. Okay, well, that might work at a grocery store. Even there, though, I would argue we have been corrupted by emotions that have been sort of brought to us by, years of commercials that evoke certain emotion, evoke certain emotions when we see a certain product. But not even going to talk about that. Let's talk about healthcare. Okay, it's really rational, and I want everybody to be considerate and use the healthcare that they need, and be considerate of others, and take turns and make rational decisions. That is, cost benefit analysis. And if you think about healthcare, it's a perfect example. If somebody's kid is sick, they couldn't care less how much it costs. Okay? They believe that they need the help from society to help heal their child, even if it's millions of dollars, and you could, give 1,000 kids glasses or something for it. So the point is that we talk about rationality in decision making in sort of the capitalist system, which is attributing rationality to people, is generally, um, you know, well, I don't know how successful it is over time, but again, I'll stop here.
Mark, tell the listeners a little bit about your work in the cannabis industry in the state of Illinois.
Sure. Well, so I have the benefit of having worked for, a major voluntary health organization, for, almost a couple of decades. And so I was very conversant in the issues related to cannabis. The other reason why I was conversant is because I'm a cannabis user. Have been public about it long before it became cool, which is why early on, after medical cannabis was legalized in Illinois, one of my friends came to me and asked for help applying for medical cannabis licenses, and that's where my journey started. Um, uh, I early on, and by the time adult use legalization came around, I was sufficiently was well versed enough um, to be sort of at the table when the adult use was written, and so I sort of had a good, good worm's eye view of the nooks and crannies of the law in Illinois. And so after the law passed and cannabis became legal and the application process opened up, I participated in a number of um, license applications as a consultant because, people were sort of saying, hey, you were there, where the bodies are buried. You were there when the thing was written. You know what they're looking for. Will you advise us on this? And then subsequently, as people, filed applications and got involved in the cannabis industry, they realized that they needed people in City Hall or in the state capitol or, on the Hill in Washington that knew how traffic flowed and that kind of decision making in government, and could, I sometimes compare myself to a plumber because I just try to clear clogs. And so, yes, a number of my clients are cannabis related, and now I actually am working on a lot of issues that are related to hemp and hemp derived cannabinoids. So, if you have driven by a smoke shop or a CBD store and, it said Delta 8 on the window and you wondered what that means, I can actually explain it to you. You know what I mean? So there's the sort of the legal licensed Delta 9 THC, which is, what's gotten people high for centuries and millennia, that it's been around, evolving with humans. But there are, probably 100, 200 active compounds in that cannabis plant, the hemp plant, the marijuana plant, same plant, different names for it. And, sort of where we classify it in terms of legal or illegal is a definition that's evolved over time. And so a lot of the hemp stuff is actually legal. And I'm working with some of those hemp manufacturers to make sure, number one, that they don't get outlawed, but number two, that there is strict regulation. Because, I work with a type of folks who have invested millions of dollars in doing Delta 8, and then there's sort of people who are, making in their garage and basement and poisoning people. And so, the folks that I work for actually want more regulation. Very importantly, right now, they want a limited, right now, a 15-year-old kid could walk into a gas station. They couldn't buy cigarettes, but they could buy a hemp cigarette. And so we believe, we believe that hemp related consumer products should be for 21 and over, and that's something we'll be working on in the coming months. So it's if you talk about cannabis, again, that's pot, weed, whatever. It's also hemp, or a lot of people might call it ditchweed because it looks like pot, but it doesn't get you high, which is exactly what hemp is. And it's been fascinating. It's been evolving over time. There are, lots of developments. The state, has not done a great job rolling out the program, rolling out the licensing process, doing the administrative things, doing things like adding and subtracting. And so the process has been very frustrating, and the licensing process, and has taken a long time. And so, there is a need for somebody like me to help people navigate that process. But, that said, I also represent a construction company, so it's not, like, I just do pot. But that is an area of growing interest, certainly in terms of legalization and regulation.
In a hypothetical world, if Darren Bailey becomes the next governor of Illinois, do you think we still have the strong cannabis industry that we do now?
Well, I would argue that it's not that strong. There are, maybe 20 large companies that own the legal cannabis industry in Illinois. So, I would say maybe 100, 200 rich white guys. And I think I don't think it'll be outlawed if Darren Bailey becomes governor, in part because it's the law of the land. And even if, very hypothetically, he became governor, I doubt that the Illinois General Assembly would, become majority Republican, given the stark differences in the numbers between the majority Democrats and the minority Republicans. So, yeah, I think it would be fine. I think, in particular, the rich guys and, even smaller folks who could afford somebody like me will by and large be fine. But the reality is that this whole industry was stood up to try to help people who were, somehow hurt by the illegal, ineffective, um, thankfully, hopefully, mostly dead war on drugs, which itself was, in many ways utilized just as an acceptable form of racism. Um, so there are a lot of people out there whose lives have been ruined by, doing the very things that I've done in my life. And, ostensibly, they should have some benefit from legalization of cannabis. And I certainly, I don't think the current administration has done a great job. So I certainly don't see the new administration doing a great job, in part just because I think, in some ways he'd probably just want to be as hands off as possible because he doesn't want to have to explain his involvement in cannabis to his core constituency. But the bottom line is, I think it would survive.
Mark, the last question we ask are, what are 2 books you'd recommend to the audience that have been important to you, and why?
So the couple of books I thought about as really giving me a deeper understanding into human nature and into the psyche of the people that we deal with day in and day out. One was a book called Night by Elie Wiesel, a famous Jewish author who's a concentration camp survivor who wrote about the Holocaust. And Night is a fictional book that is basically pick any number of young men among the 6 million killed and other millions maimed and sort of broken for life. Take any one of those experiences and it could be a book from them. And as I mentioned earlier on, it really just demonstrates the banality of evil. People would run the gas chambers, and then they might go see their family on the weekend and hug their kids and have a picnic. And to me, that's just so incongruent that it helped me understand that all of us have, the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. It certainly helped inform my perspective on politics, on racism. I never claimed to be, because of my experience as a guy who, has pigmentation, but I always like to say that perhaps I am, a little more empathetic than, an American-born Caucasian male. So Night is one book, and the other one that really, helped me understand politics without even necessarily needing to understand politics was reading Animal Farm in high school. And Animal Farm is essentially, sort of a comedy and a tragedy because it's a book about, animals, obviously, but it's also a book about politics. And it uses these very simple propositions to really help explain. I think, most of the time, if politicians, want to make a horse and they take in an elephant and a mouse and they, get a giraffe, they say, hey, that's close enough to a horse. We'll take it. And that sort of ridiculousness, was something that book helped me understand and has informed my approach because, I always try to say, when I get heated under the collar as a lobbyist, I always try to remind myself, don't take it personally. Don't attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. That's one of my basic operating principles. And I think that book helped me succeed in my current career.
Mark, if somebody would be interested in working with you, learning about your business, how would they find you on the internet?
My website, very basic website, is MB.
Help George stay on the Chicago Heights City Council. Go and donate today at tinyurl.com/AldermanGeorge 2023. Need more George? Like his pages on Facebook. Friends of George Brassey PAC, Fifth Ward Business Alliance, Chicago Heights Bicycle and Pedestrian Resource Center, and the George Brassey Podcast. Need more George? Like his pages on Facebook. Friends of George Brassey PAC, Fifth Ward Business Alliance, Chicago Heights Bicycle and Pedestrian Resource Center, and the George Brassey Podcast.